She oversees a range of policy and research activities related to disability and aging. She has 25 years of experience with disability and long-term care issues, including managed care and other health and long-term care delivery systems. So with that, we'll begin.
The microphone is in the right area for me. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're listening from. CMS wants to take this opportunity to thank Mathematica Policy Research for presenting this forum on Money Follows the Person Demonstration Grant Program. I want to first say that the MFP CMS team has been out in the field doing site visits along with representatives from Mathematica and from our technical assistance provider. And we've learned a lot from visiting individuals who have transitioned into the community and visited many people who were still in the institutional setting and were going to be transitioning shortly. And it's been very heartwarming to see that the funds that were provided by Congress through the Money Follows the Person demonstration are being used to transition individuals who would most likely have stayed in institutional settings for many, many years more. But that's not what I wanted to really talk about this morning, was the good work that's being done for people. But I wanted to talk about the MFP program as being a long-term care laboratory for new and innovative transition services, and developing working relationships between state departments, divisions, services at not only the state level, but at the federal level. We're bringing departments and services together and knocking down a lot of stovepipes. And this is bringing together service systems for multiple populations together in many cases for the first time. Using individual performance indicators to assess service and satisfaction, and using that data to improve the quality of services, the types of services, and the quality of performance of the service delivery system. We're doing what's called the Quality of Life Survey. And the Quality of Life Survey is being administered to every MFP participant 3 times, before leaving the institution, 1 year after leaving the institution, and 2 years after leaving the institution. And we're going to be assessing satisfaction with living situations, access to personal care, choice and control, respect and dignity, community integration and inclusion, and health status. And how did the MFP participants fare in the community? We're going to learn a lot from that data. And which types of individuals do better in the community, and its quality of life associated with certain program characteristics. We're also going to be developing additional services and infrastructure needed to sustain each state's rebalancing program and improve the overall long-term care system through the use of funds made through the MFP enhanced and increased reimbursement rates. So all of the money that would be above the normal FFP rates that would be published, including the increased FMAP that we're giving based on the Recovery Act, as well as the statutory enhanced FMAP, those dollars have to go to build additional infrastructure, create new services in the long-term care delivery system in the state. And we hold states accountable for rebalancing their long-term care systems through the establishment of benchmarks for each demonstration year, such as the projected number of eligible individuals transitioned from an inpatient facility to a qualified residence, increase in qualified expenditures for home and community-based services, utilization rates for screening, identification, and assessment process for persons who are candidates for transitioning to the community, progress directed by the state to achieve flexible financing strategies, such as as global or pooled financing or other budget transfer strategies that allow really money to follow the person. And increases in available and accessible supportive services, including the use of one-time transition services, purchase and adaptation of medical equipment, housing and transportation services beyond those used for the money follows the person transition participants. And we do understand that when you develop a very complicated demonstration like we have under MFP, it is important to realize that it takes time to get these projects off the ground, and I think you'll hear more about that in the following presentations. CMS will continue to work with our states in the social science laboratory created by this demonstration to rebalance their long-term care systems and increase access to quality home and community-based services and reduce the use of institutional services. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Carol Berman, and I'm a senior researcher here at Mathematica. I actually direct our evaluation work for this particular demonstration. And the principal aims of Money Follows the Person is first to reduce the reliance on institutional care, to develop community-based long-term care opportunities, and most importantly, to enable people with disabilities to participate as fully as possible in their communities. CMS, when they were first getting this program off the ground, there was a CMS staffer who developed this logo for the program, and of course it's green, for the color of money. And at the top of this logo, it characterizes what is most or best well known about this program, which is it's a program to help people move from institutional care to the community. So the logo depicts these two people. They appear to be moving away from a medical facility into a community. One person is walking with a cane, another person is in a wheelchair, depicting that the people who will transition through this program will be a variety of different types of folks with different kinds of needs. What I really like, though, about this graphic is that these two individuals who are making this move have capes blowing off their backs. And the capes have dollar bills on them. But the way that I think about these people and the way they're depicted is that they are the superheroes of this program. Now, today, both myself and my colleague, Deborah Lipson, we still don't have much data yet to talk about these particular individuals affected by the program, but I want to assure you that our evaluation is focused very much on these individuals and what happens to them, and CMS is as well. Today I want to talk a little bit about the MFP program itself, make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of their understanding of the details. Then I'm going to present some information, some data that we've been compiling to set the groundwork for our evaluation. Essentially, I'm going to be presenting some information about where were the states in terms of their long-term care systems and transition from institutional care to the community before MFP was put into place. So where are the starting points for the states? Then I'm going to turn the podium over to Deborah Lipson, who's going to talk a little bit about our implementation analyses and what we've learned so far. So the MFP program was established by the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005, and it is established as a demonstration, as Ron indicated. It is a pilot. It's a test. It's a laboratory to see what it takes for states to transition people out of institutional care. In January of 2007, CMS awarded 17 grants. These grants go to Medicaid agencies, so they're state-level grants. Then in May of 2007, a couple of months later, they awarded 14 more. So if you add that up, that makes 31 grantees. In the interim, since those grants were given, one state has elected to not implement a program. So as of today, we have 30 grantees 29 states and the District of Columbia. CMS has committed so far a little over $1.4 billion in awards for these programs. And awards where the commitment at the state level varies anywhere from about $5 million up to about $142 million. And the variation in the funding really reflects the populations that these states target and the types of benefits state plans provide while people are in the program. If you remember nothing else today about my presentation, the one takeaway I hope that you do remember is that MFP program is really two programs in one, and Ron actually touched on this a little bit. They are a transition program, and that is the aspect of the program that has gotten the most interest so far, and I think it will get the most interest throughout the life of the demonstration. And that is the transition program that is depicted on the logo that I showed you first. But lurking behind the transition program is also a rebalancing program that the states must implement as well. And the rebalancing program is their effort to restructure their long-term care system so that access to home and community-based services are improved and the proportion of long-term care spending grows. Long-term care spending going to home and community-based services grows. Now, the transition programs that the states implement have to follow a number of federal guidelines. First of all, the people eligible for the program must be in institutional care for a minimum of 6 months. So that this program is focused on probably the people who are most difficult to transition. When people transition, they must transition into a qualified resident. This is defined in the federal legislation. Qualified residence can be a home, an apartment, or a group home with 4 or fewer people. States must also provide a number of quality assurances in recognition of the fact that these people, at least everyone anticipated that the people who would be transitioned would have high levels of need. So states must provide 24-hour backup, emergencies. They must have in place risk assessment and mitigation processes, and they have to have incident reporting and management systems. Going on then, once someone transitions, then they are eligible for MFP services for a year from that date of transition, and that gets counted in days. So you're eligible for MFP services for 365 days. MFP services are essentially the package of home and community-based services, or HCBS, that the state provides to these individuals. Home and community-based services, just as an aside, can be either a state plan service, which means that it's available to everyone who is a Medicaid beneficiary, or they are provided through waivers, where a state can limit the people who are eligible for the services. And it's really up to the states and how they're structured as to whether or not the MFP services will be more coming off the state plan or through waivers. So the services that they provide take on 3 categories or types of services. The first being what are known as the qualified HCBS. These are the services individuals would have been eligible for, regardless of their participation in MFP. Demonstration HCBS services, then, are Medicaid reimbursable services, but they are either services that the state doesn't routinely provide to individuals, or they are services that are above and beyond what they typically provide. So, for instance, if a state provides, say, 20 hours of personal care each week, people in MFP, they may offer them, say, 30 or 40 hours a week. And then the last category of services are supplemental services. These are typically services that are not reimbursable by Medicaid, and they tend to be one-time services that people need just at transition. You know, maybe a supply of food for the first week they're in their home, or some furnishings, Some states are paying to have people come and do a trial run in their house. They stay overnight for a night, things like that. Once people leave the MFP program, the state also has to assure what is known as continuity of services. That is, after their eligibility for MFP ends, then the state has to assure that they continue to receive the qualified HCBS based on their eligibility. Going on to the rebalancing program then. When individuals in MFP use either qualified or demonstration HCBS, the state receives enhanced matching dollars for those services. As part of MFP, they are required then to take those enhanced dollars and reinvest it into a long-term care service. And they can reinvest it in almost any way that they feel will work for them. And to give you some examples, some states are using these dollars to pay for the cost of closing beds and facilities. Other states are using them to help other people who are not eligible for MFP make that transition to the community. They may also be using the dollars to, say, increase HCBS waiver slots or implement a self-direction program. And then some states are taking the dollars and trying to improve infrastructure like housing, affordable and accessible housing, or strengthen their direct service worker force. Those are just some examples of how states are going to use their extra dollars. I think the most important thing to remember is that the MFP participants have to be using services in order to get these dollars, so that these programs will start a little bit later than their transition programs and rely heavily on those transition programs and the numbers of people that they end up transitioning. So in summary, the MFP program has been designed to focus on people who may be particularly challenging to transition to community living. And it's been designed to help and provide states an opportunity to make investments in their long-term care system so that they improve accessibility to HCBS and a greater proportion of long-term care dollars go to HCBS. For the national evaluation that we have been contracted to do for CMS, we are doing an implementation analysis, which Deborah is going to be talking about. And then on the data end of things, we are doing, we group our analyses into two types. One into a state-level analysis, where we're going to be looking at trends in use and expenditures for long-term care. And we'll also be doing individual-level analyses. Our focus here are some of the key things we're going to be looking at are transition rates and whether or not transitions are successful. That is, when somebody leaves and enters the community, do they stay in the community? And also looking at quality of life. Quality of life is something that Ron talked a little bit about. At the request of CMS, we designed a survey instrument to capture quality of life information, and states are actually implementing that survey. And we hope to have some data on that next year. I'm going to shift now then and talk a little bit about the groundwork we've been doing for the national evaluation. And I want to start out with the groundwork that we've been doing for our state-level analyses. This work is something that I and my colleague Jeff Ballou have been doing. We're using, for this particular work, we use data from calendar year 2005. And our data comes from the Medicaid analytical extract system. And essentially we asked a fairly basic question, which is, what was the state of long-term care systems before MFP was implemented? Where the state started. With the data that we have, we estimate that in 2005 there were about 2.75 million users of long-term care services across the states that received MFP grants. So these are not national numbers. These are just for the MFP states themselves. Of these 2.75 million users, 60% used HCBS that year. 49% used long-term care services.
you are quick on your arithmetic, you'll know that 49 plus 60 is 109, which represents the fact that about 9% of people use both types of services, both institutional and HCBS. These 275 million users, their expenditures for long-term care amounted to about $69 billion in 2005. And those expenditures, 35% went to HCBS and 65% went to long-term care, or to institutional care. Now, behind these aggregate numbers is a fair amount of state variation. So when you think about the percentage of users using HCBS, we have one MFP state where in this year only 30% of long-term care users use HCBS. And we have another state where 85% of long-term care users use community services. So quite a bit of variation and difference between the states. On the expenditures end, we have one state where only 12% of long-term care expenditures went to HCBS, and whereas on the other end of the spectrum, we have a state where 58% of spending went to community care. We looked a little bit at, well, who are these people using long-term care services? And for people who do research in this area, I don't think this is going to be anything new. A little over half of users are elderly. A little over 1/4% are people under the age of 65 with physical disabilities. We find about 15% are people with developmental disabilities, and 3% are people with chronic mental illness. Now, as an aside, I'm pretty sure that we're underestimating the number of people with chronic mental illness. Our data, it's very difficult to identify these folks. And this year we are trying to refine our methods so we do a better job, but I think we will, as long as we rely heavily on claims information, we're going to be undercounting these people. When we break out the use and expenditures by these groups of individuals, we see that where the baseline or the starting point is for these states varies by the type of person that we're talking about. So at the baseline, for people with developmental disabilities, about 53% of their long-term care expenditures in the baseline period were for HCBS. Whereas 84% of these individuals were using that type of care in the year that we had data. And then from there, I mean, what these data indicate is that the real challenge for the states will be to increase HCBS use and expenditures among the elderly and people under age 65 with disabilities, physical disabilities. So in sum, the way that I think about it is that MFP offers different opportunities for different states and different types of populations. And I'm going to move on now and talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing to set up our analyses at the individual level. This work is being led by one of our colleagues, Audra Winslow. And she actually did this work about a year ago, so she uses the data that I'm presenting here is a little bit older than the data that I just went through. And she used records from the Medicaid Analytical Extract System for calendar year 2004. And what we were asking for this particular analysis, our basic question is, how common were transitions before MFP was implemented? I mean, was this a rare occurrence or was this fairly common? In some sense, some people would call this defining the magnitude of a problem. We first estimated the size of the population eligible for MFP, and during 2004, across the MFP states, again, this is not a national number, we estimate that about 1 million people have been institutionalized for 6 months or more, and this represents about 45% of those in institutional care in that calendar year. Again, there's considerable variation across states, so we find about 3,000 people would have been eligible for been in place in Delaware, all the way up to 126,000 in Europe. The population of people eligible for the program are dominated by the elderly. About 3/4 are elders. 14% are people under the age of 65 with physical disabilities, 9% with developmental disabilities, and 1% with chronic mental illness. The estimated transition rates overall and by these population groups. So of the 1 million people we estimated were eligible for MFP in 2004, between 2 and 6% transitioned to a community that calendar year. Strike me as low numbers, and states have quite a bit of work to try to get these numbers up. And the numbers vary across the different groups that we looked at. We then said, okay, let's try to put some of these numbers into perspective and look at what were the states projecting they would do with their transition programs. And as of the end of June 2008, the states were projecting that they would transition a little under 38,000 individuals. Now, I want to emphasize that these numbers can change every single day. And Deborah is going to talk a little bit more about how they've changed since this time. But these numbers reflect what the states were hoping to do as of the end of June 2008. When we broke out these numbers by the different targeted groups, it becomes apparent that the MFP programs are disproportionately targeting those under the age of 65 and people with developmental disabilities. So if you go back to my earlier slide, you would find that among those who are long-term care users, elderly make up about 55% of that population. They then make up 77% of the people eligible for MFP. And if the states realize their targets, then about 44% of people transitioning will be elderly. For the people who are under 65 and with physical disabilities, then they make up about 27% of all long-term care users. They make up about 14% of the MFP eligible group of long-term care users. But we're anticipating to see close to 29%, 30% of MFP trans participants will be in this group. In terms of individuals with developmental disabilities, then they make up about 15% of long-term care users, 9% of those eligible for MFP, but we would expect to see about 20% of the participants to be in those groups. We then took those transition numbers and the transition rates we saw at baseline, and if the states are able to realize their targets, we estimate that MFP may increase the rate of transitions among the long-term institutionalized population by 15 to 40%, depending on the state. And we find a range between 3 and actually all the way up to 87%, depending on the state. So with that, again, I would say that from my perspective, MFP definitely represents an important opportunity for states to improve some of these numbers we've seen. But yet, I think their opportunity varies by the state as well as by the targeted population. So with that, I'm going to turn over the podium to my colleague, Deborah Lipson, and she's going to talk about some of the work we've done around the implementation of the program.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Dave and Bonnie, on behalf of the Center for inviting us to speak here today about where things are at with the MFP evaluation. As Carol explained, my role in the MFP evaluation is to assess the progress and the challenges that state agencies encounter in trying to implement this interesting program. And I am helped by many people, both here at NPR and at CMS. But I want to give special recognition to Noelle, Denny Brown, and Susan Norris, who's really been great colleagues in this endeavor. Carol Carol ended her remarks on a very positive note, pointing to the potential for MFP to increase the rate at which long-term residents can transition to the community. But that really depends on the success that states have in reaching the goals that they set and implementing their programs effectively. So today my remarks are intended to take stock of where we are about 2 years after the first states began implementing the program. And I want to talk briefly about the diversity in those state transition goals, some key differences in how states are approaching this program, where we are with respect to numbers of transitions right now, sort of the number that everybody is tracking almost on a monthly, sometimes even daily basis. Some of the challenges and barriers that states are having in trying to get this program either off the ground or in meeting the numbers that they have set for transition. And then getting to the other part that Carol had talked about that we tend to forget, but really talking about the implications of the progress to date on the other side of the equation, the long-term care rebalancing part of MFP. States do vary in the number and type of populations to be transitioned, both by the year that they are, the year of the demonstration. Initially, the program was authorized for 5 years, 2007 and 2011. And we may get to talk about in the discussion that time frame that's being discussed. There are some discussions in Congress about extending that period of time, but right now it's over a 5-year period. And I'm going to show you how the numbers of transitions vary over the 5 years in just a second. They also vary in the distribution across the 5 population groups that CMS has defined for transition tracking purposes. We know from the first report from the field that you'll find out on the desk outside that the percentage of MFP eligibles targeted by each state changes. I'm not going to talk too much about that because you can read a little bit more about that in the report. And we also have very strong suspicions that the medical complexity and level of care needed by the people that each state is targeting differs greatly. But we have yet to be able to document that empirically with data. So we will be collecting data later on in the evaluation to understand that situation better. In terms of transition goals by demonstration year, overall, for all of the 30 grantee states, you'll see that the numbers planned do vary over time. They start out very small. In 2007, there were hardly any. Most states knew that 2007 would be a planning year. And even in 2008, last year, you'll see that there were only almost 2,200 transitions expected. In 2009, however, you see this very big jump, over almost 9,500. And we really should start to see those numbers increase this year for the first time. So if people are feeling like, gee, we haven't seen what's happening yet, it's because the states had never intended to really reach very big numbers until this year. When we then look at how each state has apportioned their transition goals across the 5 population groups, you again see tremendous diversity. This slide may seem like a lot going on, but I really wanted to just give you a flavor, at a glance, a sense for the variation both in numbers, from lowest, I think, Delaware and maybe North Dakota, 100 folks that they're projecting to transition over the 5-year period, to almost or even exceeding 3,000 over the life of the demonstration. And the big states that you would imagine, Illinois, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Texas. But you'll also notice that if you look at the colors here, and those maybe of you who are viewing this on your computers can see it even better, there are some states like Iowa, the District of Columbia, are initially anyway, only transitioning people with intellectual disabilities. And other states like Michigan, Indiana, and New York divide their target populations between the elderly and people with physical disabilities who are in nursing homes. So again, there's really, each state you look at, like any Medicaid program, it's going to be very different. Here, once again, their MFP program and the folks that they're targeting are very different. Moving on. Any program designed to get folks out of institutions has to have some pretty basic common features. They have to provide transition coordination services, help to get to assess people's needs, find appropriate housing, set up the services in the community. And in most cases, states participating in MFP need to really increase their capacity to provide these kinds of critical services. They're also needing to address what many say is the biggest barrier that prevents most people from getting out right now, and that's finding affordable and accessible housing. As Carol began to mention before, and Ron did as well, most states have to offer additional services above and beyond what their state Medicaid programs already cover in order to help those folks move out of institutions. So they're offering demonstration and supplemental services. 4 states feel that their Medicaid programs already cover just about everything that's needed, so they are not offering demonstration and supplemental. And in addition, most states participating in the program need to change their Medicaid policies in one way or another, either to make sure that the folks who are transitioned through MFP can get all the services they need in that first year after transition, or to continue to be served in the community after their 1-year MFP eligibility period. I'm going to talk a few examples about these different approaches. States, while they have these basic elements in common, also differ greatly in how they're approaching each of these elements. And as part of our evaluation, we will be examining whether certain approaches seem to be more successful than others, depending on the outcomes that we see later on. For example, some states are choosing to hire or use their own state or local staff to provide transition coordination. Others are contracting with private organizations, whether they be centers for independent living, area agencies on aging, other kinds of state management agencies, and some are using a combined approach. I would say, from my early view of what's going on, those states that can either rely on experienced staff or experienced agencies really have a heads up of, that they're already well along their way because they can build on that experience. Those states that have not had as much experience are a little behind the 8 ball and have to ramp up, take longer to build that capacity and experience. It's not an easy thing. It requires very special skills and an intensive period of time for people to be able to really understand how to put all these packages of service together in a meaningful way for each individual. I don't know how many times I can say it, but the ability to find affordable and accessible housing for these individuals is absolutely critical. Most states have chosen this first strategy, which is to set up registries to link available units with the people who are looking for them. Again, most of these registries are online, and I think the best ones are those that are updated regularly, otherwise there wouldn't be much use. So but even within this first one, there's some variation of what states are doing. Most states are reaching out to their public housing authorities, whether it's at state or local level, to build the kind of relationship that really make it possible to dedicate these units to people who are coming out of institutions. And I wanted to point to this last one. I think the 10 or so states that are able to carve out little pots of money to be able to help people moving out of institutions, cover the cost of housing before they're eligible for a second unit or before they get a housing voucher is absolutely essential. So it's just a prediction right now, but I would say that you're going to see greater success in these 10 states perhaps than others. Again, depending on what the local situation is with regard to housing. We talked about a couple of times now the demonstration of supplemental services, with most states providing some support of these types. Again, most of it is for things like one-time moving costs, security deposits, environmental modifications that may be needed to the places where they're moving, assistive technology. Some states, because of the previous targeted case management rules, feel that they want to use this ability to provide additional or longer transition coordination services than might otherwise have been allowed in the past. I think one of the most interesting things, this goes back to what Ron said about this is really a laboratory. There's not too many states, but some states went into this saying, we want to see whether offering very particular kinds of services really helps to overcome the barriers that they have seen in the past. So, for example, in states like Arkansas, Hawaii, and North Dakota, they're experimenting with telehealth services that they think may make it possible for people to remain in their home. Others that are targeting the folks who have chronic mental illness believe that they need to really supplement what they're doing on the mental and behavioral health side to fill gaps in Medicaid coverage. Texas, for example, I think has a really interesting behavioral health pilot program, right now limited to the San Antonio area, but I think one that shows great promise. The kinds of changes that states are making to their home community-based service policies, in some cases, half a dozen states are setting up new waiver programs to serve people specifically transitioning from institutions. You know, most states have multiple waiver programs, so in some cases it's just one more. But because of the high needs of many of these folks, they feel they need to essentially carve out another program, in part because they are worried about meeting the cost neutrality requirements that these waivers need to demonstrate on a regular basis. Other states don't need to quite go to that length of creating a waiver program. Instead, they just need to increase the capacity of their existing waivers by adding more slots. Or many of the states really, and I think this is almost more on the rebalancing side, said let's use the MFP opportunity to increase options for consumer direction. The CMS program announcement actually required states to do something along these lines. So you see efforts in most states to try and increase those options. But I think it's really interesting, and will be interesting to see what's going on in the 7 states that have said, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable for really reaching certain targets each year in terms of increasing numbers or percentage of folks in waiver programs that choose to self-direct. All right, let's move on. So what are we seeing now with respect to current implementation status? You have to keep in mind that we've almost got 3 sets of states that you'll need to watch. The 7 states that began their programs at the end of 2007, early 2008, what I call the early implementers. The 16 states that began towards the end of 2008, 16 in-betweeners, and then 7 late implementers that really didn't start doing anything until January of this year, 2009. In general, states with more experience and infrastructure to conduct transitions began earlier, though that's not always the case. And remember also that these start dates were affected by the speed with which the states could write a very extensive operational protocol, submit it to CMS, and have it approved before they could actually get going. So in some cases, writing that operational protocol or making sure that they could set up a reporting system to track these folks separate from all the other waiver participants delayed their start dates in some cases. All right, the numbers. Everybody's focused on the numbers here. What are we saying with regard to the numbers that transitioned to date? All right, let's just first look at this first slide. In 2007 and 2008, the last column shows about almost 1,500 people transitioned. But that's, remember, compare that to about the 2,200 that I said states had targeted by the end of 2008. So it's about 2/3. They've been about 2/3 of their target. So we're not totally off from what states were projecting, at least in the initial year. We're off by some, but I think most states are hoping to catch up. And indeed, in the first half of this year, you see a big jump, significant uptick in the numbers who are transitioned, a little over 1,900. Of course, that's well short of the 9,500 or so that were projected for this year. So they've got a ways to make up. Some states are saying, yeah, but we're on a roll. You're going to see really even more. And we're all hoping that's the case, but we have yet to see what will happen in the remainder of this year. So cumulatively, we see 3,400 people already transitioned out of institutions. Now, you can say, yeah, but compared to the numbers that were targeted, that's not much. I got to tell you, when I've gone on a few site visits, others here in the room have as well, and just to be able to go and see the kinds of people who've been able to come out of institutions and think that there's 3,400 of them is really a remarkable achievement. But let me just spend one more moment looking at these numbers. And this goes back to what Carol said in a couple of different slides. When you look at the percentage of total transitions to date by these 5 different target groups, you'll see that compared to the total numbers that they have transitioned, the bottom row here, 30%, compared to 47% that were targeted among the elderly, only 30% of those transitions so far are elderly. Likewise, we're seeing greater numbers of younger people younger than 65 with physical disabilities and folks with intellectual disabilities make up a greater proportion of the transitions to date than have been projected. So I think this is beginning to tell us that indeed the elderly are more difficult to bring out. Those younger than 65 with other kinds of disabilities tend to have more options. We do further work to really understand that better, but that's certainly what's the emerging picture. Carol said also that with the numbers are in flux, literally whatever I give you, the numbers here, they're going to change. But just to give you a sense of how the program has evolved so far, when states initially submitted their applications for this program in late 2006, they came up with about 37,700 transitions that they anticipated making over the 5-year demonstration period. About a year and a half later, when all states had approved operational protocols, that number dropped to about 35,500. And 6 months later, when they submitted their supplemental grant requests, made a number of other amendments in their operational protocols, the number dropped further to about 34,000. In November of this year, states are once again asked to submit their supplemental budget requests to CMS, and in those requests you will see what they then think their transition targets are for subsequent years. We don't know what we're going to see. It may drop again, it may not, but just keep in mind this is a program in flux and the numbers are going to change over time as states realize that they may either have been too ambitious or maybe in a few cases states feel like they're doing great and want to increase their numbers. That too is a possibility. I want to also caution you though that not all states are reducing their targets. Most states have pretty much held to what they originally said. Most of the drop is accounted for by about 5 states that really just went in with a very different plan and realized it was not realistic and so had to revise really their whole program. So there's really only about 5 states that account for the majority of the drop over time. So why are states finding this harder to do than they expected? A lot of it involves these temporary reporting requirements that just, take up a lot of effort and divert their efforts away from the transition process. The limitation to these qualified residences, which limit assisted living, particularly for the elderly, may be part of the issue. And as Carol has said, and others I think in this room know, people who've been in institutions for at least 6 months may be among the hardest to transition, particularly if they've lost their housing. Some challenges are very state-specific, of course, particularly those with minimal experience prior to the MFP program have to put in place the basic elements of this program, and that can be really difficult to generate interest and awareness and understanding of what it's all about. How many times have I said housing? I can't say it enough. Half the states are saying the shortages of affordable accessible housing units are really contributing to their inability to meet their original targets. 71 particular candidates couldn't enroll, but I'm sure the number is probably higher than that. And in some cases, the inadequate community-based service systems are the real problem. Either there's not enough direct care workers, there's not enough agencies to provide all the services that these folks required. In some cases, the waivers that states have planned to set up aren't going as well as they had hoped, and they can't pay the providers enough or whatever. So these are the kinds of issues that I think we're seeing that are not uncommon, not surprising in some ways, but we're hoping that states are able to figure out some solutions. And then we can't forget the fact that this program was implemented in this one of the worst economic downturns this country has experienced, and that is really affecting many, many aspects of the program, from state management capabilities to the rates that they can pay providers to provide these services, delays in contracting, any number of things. So, I mean, there's a lot of really valid reasons why are a little bit late today. let me conclude with just a few thoughts regarding the long-term care rebalancing implications of all this. I do think that, you know, if some people thought that MFP was going to be the next era of deinstitutionalization, I think we've got to temper our expectations to some extent. Several factors are contributing to making sure that we don't raise our expectations too high, chief among them that the MFP transition numbers, even if they achieve, let's say, 34,000, 35,000, are very, very small relative to the numbers who remain in institutions so far, 1 million, at least in these 30 states, as Carol has said before. And the numbers are coming down as states realize just how difficult this is. So really not something we should raise our expectations about too high. And even with regard to the rebalancing opportunities and potential of this program, the fewer transitions, the less money there will be to invest in other aspects of long-term care restructuring and system reform. In conclusion, I'd like to say that you know, I still think it's important to see MFP in the broader long-term care rebalancing picture here. And I do think that MFP remains an important impetus for long-term care reform in many different ways. It is critical, for example, to ensuring individual rights under Olmstead. I've visited a half a dozen people who have come out under this program so far, and there's no question that their quality of life has improved. They believe that this is, they almost laugh at you and say, so how is your life compared now to when you were in an institution? And they look at you as if you were from outer space. It's like a duh. Nobody wants to be in an institution, no matter what their age, disability, or anything else. So this is absolutely critical. And as Ron said, I think this is really showing us new ways and really what's possible to ensure that people, even with very exceptional needs, can be maintained in the community. So I think it really has that potential. But at the same time, I would say that MFP could pose risks to other components of long-term care system reform, particularly if it reduces or diverts resources that states are currently devoting to preventing institutionalization in the first place, or trying to reduce the length of stay in an institution. And then I worry sometimes that because states are so concerned about giving MFP participants priority or first, you know, dibs on waiver placements, that will affect or harm other people who could have been served in the community as well. In closing, I think much of the MFP story remains to be told as states work out these problems over time and they see the ways in which they're able to overcome these problems. Mathematica is committed to keeping the public informed about the progress through our reports from the field, 2 of which have been published so far and are available on the table outside, and are also available on NPR and CMS website. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me to be the first discussant. I thought I would start off by kind of telling you how I got here, and I work for ASPE, which is the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation in HHS, but I came out of developmental disabilities, and when I did first go to ASPE, I was telling somebody from the DV field that I'm at ASPE now, and I must not articulate very well or something, and the person said, "You're at ASPE?" but it kind of, right, it's an institutional thing, you know, institution, community. And then I thought I'd go way, way into Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine and tell you how I got into developmental disabilities in the first place, because thinking about MFP made me think about this, and I hadn't thought about it in a long time. When I was about 12 or 13 in the mid-1960s, my friend Dale Cohen, who later became a nun, this is true, and I can't talk about that right now, but anyway, she was really into community service, right? And as baby boomers, this is what we think about. And she said, there's a really cool thing we can do. You want to go? We can work at this place at the state school. It just opened up, and they're having a Cub Scout troop, and we can go volunteer. So it was Woodbridge State School in New Jersey, and it was brand new. It opened in 1965.
And we went to this Cub Scout troop, okay? So we're, a bunch of 12-year-olds going in to volunteer at this Cub Scout troop. The Cub Scouts were like 17 and 18, and, however old people get when you're 12. But it was an incredibly eye-opening experience, like nothing that I had ever seen. And it was a horrible place for people to live. This is before ICFMR, because ICFMR didn't come along until the 70s. Before New York even thought about ICFMR. And I remember walking into the cottages and in a room about this big, fully lined with beds, and the beds were it looked like one big bed along each side of the room. This is for real. This is what it really looked like before regulation and before we ever thought about community options. So when I think about MFP, it's really cool to think that we have come such a long way, that we're having this conversation, and so many of the conversations that we have. And it is a wonderful, wonderful thing, but I think we also have a long way to go, and we have some other things that we need to still think about. So I thought I would talk, as I step back a little bit today. First, I want to say one thing about research, because it's great to listen to some of these research results. But then I want to talk about rebalancing and personal opinion that I have about rebalancing, lay it out there. And then I want to talk about some of the complexities of delivering community care, many of which have already been discussed today, that we all know about, but to kind of bring all that together. And then think about going forward with the money policy program. So first, I went to a meeting once that some people here were at too, that was pulled together by researchers who do policy research, who were saying, what can we do to get policymakers to use our research? How can we do that? And I think that's something that we should think about a lot, because listening to some of these results, how can we get them infused into what people do? What somebody at that meeting said that has always stuck with me, Peter Kemper, a person I really respect and admire a great deal, said, well, I think we would be really lucky. It would be a really good thing if policymakers use research 5% of the time. And I have to say, sadly, I think that's true. So I would love to see some of this stuff translated in a way that people who are on the Hill, people who are in my department and other departments, can use it and think about it, and use it now, even in process. So anyway, we know people prefer community services, but I do want to say I think we should be careful about buying into this one-size-fits-all. The community services are the answer for everybody all the time. And I'm not here to do some defense of institutions. That's not what I mean. But I do mean that when a person ends up in a nursing home or in an institution, it's thought through. It's not something that people just do or that states just do randomly. It's a really radical thing that happens to a person. It's a major life change. And I do think we should promote choice as much as we can. I think it's really important to enable people to live in the community as much as is possible, and more than that. But we should not think about rebalancing on the backs of people who have made this hard decision, who have to place themselves or their relatives in an institutional setting. And so I think sometimes we almost demonize people who have made that decision, or demonize the policymakers who enable that decision to be made, or the state funders who enable that decision to be made. And I think we should all kind of approach this in kind of a sensitive human way and think about those human beings. I also think, this is not the case with this study, and I'm really glad, but I think as we talk about rebalancing, that people mix up what's going on, especially in nursing homes. So you think, oh, the census of a nursing home on any given day is about 1.5 million people. Let's not mix up the fact that a whole lot of that is Medicare post-acute stays in that same business of that nursing home. So when we talk about rebalancing, often people will, I think I hear people conflating post-acute care and long-term care. So as we pat ourselves on the back about how far we've come or how far we haven't come, let's think about the long-term stays that we're really talking about. I also, in support of this kind of conversation about the choices people make and supporting them in the choice that they make, in our office, we did a study of an admission cohort of people who use long-term care insurance, who go into claim status using long-term care insurance. And obviously this is an aging population that I'm talking about in this case. The question that's very interesting, we like to study that population, work with contractors to study that population.
in part because it can teach us a lot about what kind of choices people make when money's not a problem, not Medicaid. When they have money, it's just what kind of choice do they make, what's best for them. And what we find is people that start using their long-term care insurance policies is that the vast majority of them, they start with home care, but most of them, on any given day, people who are using their long-term care insurance are using it in an institutional setting. And I am considering non-nursing home residential settings somewhat institutional too. I know some people call that community, but 100-bed place calls itself assisted living for the purpose of this conversation. People are either in assisted living, more likely to be there, or in a nursing home when they're spending their own money, when they have the benefit. What does drive the decision to go? Another recent finding from one of our studies, which was an analysis done by Brenda Stillman of the National Long-Term Care Survey, is that the biggest thing is physical strain and financial strain on caregivers. So one of the lessons for us, all of us, is to think about caregiver support and alleviating some of that physical strain, some of that financial strain. And the other thing I want to say about people in nursing homes, again, to kind of support this, let's not rebalance on their balance argument, is that most of them are really old. Most of them, they're at the last house on the block, they're in their late 80s, they have multiple ABLs, they have chronic conditions, as well as their functional impairments. They disproportionately have dementia. It's just kind of something to keep in mind. That this is hard. This is hard stuff. So on to the complications of providing community care. And Deborah did allude to most of them, but I just thought I'd kind of put them all in perspective as we think about this program. There are some places where we haven't exactly cracked the case. Like we think we're smart, and we've been doing this a long time, but I'm not sure that we're as smart as we think. And we need to get smarter. We need to make decision makers smarter about some of these things. The first thing, and this has been true for a really long time, Medicaid is so complicated. It takes, somebody once said to me, you have to get down in the bowels of Medicaid for at least 5 years before you can even figure out which way is up, before you can use it. And I'm always blown away by people that come to Medicaid and 6 months later they get it. They've been studying 24/7. They have to, because it's really, really complicated. We need to have, because of this complexity of Medicaid, we need to have it so that across all these states, across this room, among people on the Hill, that we all have the same understanding of Medicaid. And I guess I have good news on that front. In the 90s, after health reform didn't work out that time, we started thinking about what we could do. And in our office, we went around and started talking to groups of people. And we were up at CMS, and we were talking to some advocates and some folks that work at CMS, and somebody I deeply admire, the late Gary Smith, sitting there in his kind of casual way, and he said, you know what you guys need to do? You know what you need to do? You need to write a book that says, yes, you can. And I swear he said that, and this was like a really long time ago. He thought of it first, right? Memorialized. Anyway, the thing is, he said, at CMS, all you do is you tell us what we can't do. And we're trying to provide community-based services. Tell us what we can do. Because what's going on is people in Illinois, and people in Oregon, and people in Maine, and people in Georgia have a different understanding of the rules. Get the rules out in one place. So Gary's idea was to write what we call the Home and Community-Based Services Center, and he and several other very smart people worked on that. It's really, it's not, you don't want to read it cover to cover unless you're having problems with insomnia. But it's a really great place. And so advocates in a state can use it too. State people can use it. Sold out in its first 3 printings. It's still available online. That's a little outdated, but the good news is that RTI is working with us on a revised version of it, which we expect will come out by the end of this year. So universal understanding of the rules is kind of my first complexity. Second, I don't remember if Deborah mentioned this, but housing is a really big issue. And the thing is that people go in nursing homes and they lose their housing. By the time they're 6 months in, they've lost their housing. So what is the community? Where are they going to go when they leave? We were wondering about, the empirical basis for the 6 months. I don't know what it is, but why is 6 months the number? And that might be something to talk about or something to think about. It's also, as Deborah said, very hard to find accessible housing. And I remember that Peter Edelman, I think is the person, when he was the ASCII notice many years ago, said 1% of the single-family housing stock in this country is accessible for people with developmental disabilities. That's an unbelievably low number. I mean, with physical disabilities, sorry. That's an incredibly low number and something that we ought to be thinking about, like sort of universal access and building places that are accessible to everybody. There's good news on this front. I think there's a lot of, this administration is great. It's so great to be working for this administration. Henry Claypool, who is the head of the HHS Office on Disability, kind of noticed that there are problems with housing and came up with this idea and worked with HUD to get 1,000 vouchers designated as vouchers for this program that states can use for this program. And let's see how, let's see how this plays out if we make it play out. But that's a really great thing. And the other HUD update I want to tell you, speaking of vouchers, is that our chief secretary, Secretary Donovan and Secretary Sebelius, had lunch together. And apparently, this is the way history gets made, but they decided that we would have a HUD-HHS partnership. And so we have now kind of rolling out, and this seems to be a wonderful hallmark of this administration, that there's a lot of cross-departmental talk. And when you think about people moving to the community, you need cross-departmental talk. You need rehab there. You need labor there. You need time there. All of it is big. You need to think about the tax implications of caregivers. So anyway, on this HHS HUD partnership, there are 3 pieces to it. So there's a piece about homelessness. There's a piece about healthy homes, which is like lead abatement and things like that. And there's a piece called community living. And it's exactly about community living for people with disabilities, although I want to say the other 2 apply to people with disabilities also. So that's moving forward, and I think we'll see more than just those vouchers coming out of that. We'll see continued study development. So again, thinking about complexities of community, I think we need to think about how we go into institutions and assess people and identify people. And that's a really thorny and expensive problem that I'm not sure we've completely solved, and states go about it in different ways, but it is something we need to think about. Can discharge planners play a role in this? What are their interests? And do they have conflicting interests? What is their role? But whatever kinds of partners can we bring to the table? I think we need science about keeping people at home in the first place, or about helping people live at home. Just kind of some basic bench science. And I love, we have a fall prevention demonstration and people talk about like robot suits, about spacesuits and robots and like all these great things for keeping people from falling and keeping them at home. And that's cool, but I think there's simple technology too that can support people in community settings. We need social science. We do need more social science. This is great. We need more technology about what works and what doesn't work. Of course, one of my favorites to talk about, and people in our office do talk about this a lot, is consumer direction and cash and counseling. And it's always amazing to me that, between all the partners who funded cash and counseling, which is, if you don't know, it's a way to use Medicaid so that consumers have individualized budgets and can pay wherever they want, can, in many cases, purchase things that will help them stay at home, but that it's not just an agency bringing in the services. So what did we spend? 11, 12, about many millions of dollars to prove that people like to control their own lives, that people, my son was about 9 or 10, and he said to me, I know that you write, I know your job is writing, but what do you do exactly? So it's really hard when you work in an office that does policy research on long-term care to explain to a 9-year-old what you do. And so I explained to him the cash and counseling demonstration. I said, okay, so we're trying to figure out, and we're studying this, whether it's better to have a nurse come from an agency whenever she feels like it to give you a bath, or whether you choose when to get your bath, and you choose what she does with and for you. And he's like, is that a decision? That somebody
really would have, that would be a hard decision for somebody to make? Right. I mean, it does seem kind of obvious. But, Ron, you mentioned that let's be easy on MFP because it's a demonstration. It takes a long time. It took a long time to enroll people in cash income funds, which now we all go, oh, no, duh, that's such a great idea. It took we had to extend the enrollment in order to get even 15% of people in the Medicaid program to self-direct. People are afraid. What will happen to my Medicaid benefit? What will happen if I leave the institution? What will happen to my support in the MFP case? In the case of cash and counseling, it seemed obvious. And now I think it is more business as usual. But these are big changes for human beings. Workforce, Deborah mentioned workforce. We have now a couple of surveys that we've done on the workforce, the long-term care, direct care workforce, both in institutional settings, in nursing homes, and in home care. And it's interesting to me to start looking at what we're hearing from these women, mostly, and what they're telling us. Okay, so the big deal is that a little more money goes a long way in paying them. Support for caregivers, as I mentioned before, is like a major issue that we need to be thinking of for informal caregivers. People also make multiple transitions, and I think this is not just one move around the top of the earth from point A to point B, the whole earth, and down, and latitudes and longitudes. And we have to be thinking about what happens and how to track these movements, how to put people through multiple movements as we move into the community more. And I think this is a good thing that's going to come out of this evaluation. Different needs of different populations. That it's not just one big population of people that use institutions. So some of the things that I think Congress is looking at in terms of changing the money follows the person program is maybe moving a little more towards diversion, a little more, maybe think about the 6 months, maybe think about some ways that we could not just this little small population of people in institutions, but think about people in the community who might need some support to keep them from going into the institution. And then I think the really kind of the elephant in the room is that there is no such thing as a long-term care system, like it's this great thing out there waiting, ready to move out of the institution. It's a cobbled together patchwork quilt of services and supports provided in all kinds of different ways. And we need to recognize that. One positive development seems to be that the CLASS Act, the Community Living Assistance Services and Supports Act, which Senator Kennedy kind of got started. And it seems to be getting some legs up there. And the idea is that people would be able to, working people, this is about people who work, would be able to pay in throughout, over the course of their working years, and get out a self-funded long-term care benefit of some kind at the end. Lots of tweaks under discussion, lots of changes, but it's up there. Long-term care is part of the discussion. So I also wanted to share with you, because I told you my story about going into that dark ages institution and how great it is to kind of step back from it and say, damn, we've come a long, long way. That we're having this conversation, that we talk about consumer direction, people controlling their own budgets, when it used to be the money just went right into that place, right into the facility, had nothing to do with human beings. So I thought, wow, what's going on at Woodbridge State School today? It's called Woodbridge Developmental Center, of course. And here's what's going on. I pulled this off their website over the weekend. Woodbridge Developmental Center was established in 1965, where I got that, to serve persons with developmental disabilities. On its 68-acre campus in Middlesex County, the center has 25 buildings, 18 are cottages that house individuals. The multi-purpose building serves many purposes. A restaurant for the staff and people, that's a 24-hour office for the institutional officer of the day, recreational and entertainment center, the 404 individuals who live in Woodbridge State School as of March 31st, 2009, and on and on. So I guess my final comment is we should pat ourselves on the back. This is a great thing to do. Let's not deceive ourselves that we need to
tear down all institutions, and let's not celebrate that, yay, we've gotten there and we've rebalanced the system. So we need to move slowly and think carefully about this.
Thank you very much. Let's have a nice round of applause for all of you. That was an extremely interesting and thought-provoking presentation on a very important topic that probably a lot of us are thinking about either for our personal lives or in our family, or with relatives or others even that we care about in the community, as well as in our professional vocations. The way we're going to handle questions is Allison Roach, could you stand up or wave your hands or something, is going to pass around a microphone. If you have a question, please raise your hand and Allison will give you a mic. Those of you who are accessing this via webinar can type your question in the appropriate place on the website, and we will read those questions aloud as they come in. So do we have a question?
Josh Leader, RTI International. I'm curious about a number of things, but one of the main ways in which money file system was sold to Congress was as a huge cost saver. Yet not a single person today mentioned the notion of cost saving. So is that part of the design for the evaluation? And if it is, will it be able to take into account any backfilling of nursing home or other institutional beds that would offset any savings that you might get on an individual basis?
Edward Carroll, you want to handle that? Yeah, Josh, our design does include an analysis of cost. Obviously, we're going to do it at the state level and as part of our state level analysis. And you can definitely, as long as the data sources are fair and reasonably accurate, we will be looking at what happens with that and other ways in which you might measure the services, whether it be on the side or the other comments? Okay, next question. Hi, I'm Carol O'Shaughnessy with the National Health Policy Forum. And you mentioned the fact about the housing that CONT'd is going to make available. How are they doing? What are the state and local housing authorities' decisions about how they get used?
The easy answer, unfortunately, is to be determined. It was announced as part of the June 22nd Olmstead announcement, where the Secretary also created the Year of Community Living. But it's not, the details are not looked at yet, but the vouchers have been set aside.
I think that the housing vouchers,
Could you step by the mic, please?
the housing vouchers were for people who were transitioning out of institutions, and each of the states has received additional instructions on how to work with their local housing authorities so that a large portion of those vouchers can go to Money Follows the Person participants. So that was one of the things that a lot of the states needed to learn, was how to work with the quote housers in our system. So this close working relationship in several states has been really good, and in a lot of states was the first time where individuals who were working with long-term care were working with their housing agencies. And I think that this is really important, that there is a connection and a permanent connection between the two. That's one of the things I was talking about of infrastructure development, not just in the state level, but in the federal level, between HUD and HHS. well as between the local housing authorities and the health departments in each one of the states that we're working with. So it's a very, very important connection.
I think at one point, I think at one point the chairman's mark might have included the word voucher. But who knows what the merit of every day, but. All right. Are there other questions? Yes.
Thank you. Janice and American Healthcare Association. Somebody mentioned one state chose not to accept this award, and I was wondering if they provided any information about their reasons for doing that and which state was.
It was a budget issue. So that of course, each state has to provide the matching funds. And either you have the matching funds in your budget or you don't. And South Carolina did not have the money in the budget for that at that time, although they had an approved operational protocol and could reestablish their program if they do get the funding established in their budget for the match.
Additional comments on that? Okay.
Diane Justice, the National Academy for State Health Policy. There's been a lot of discussion or mention here today about the difficulty of transitioning people at 180 days or more. With the Senate Finance Committee's proposal looking at changing that to 90 days, you have, I guess, especially Mathematica, when you were doing some of the data analysis about the institutionalized population as a baseline, other than expanding the pool of eligibles, which have reduced significantly, do you have any comments or any sense about the difference in the population between the 180 days and the 90 days?
I have to admit, I don't think we looked at that, but definitely if they change the legislation, we're going to be changing our analysis and bringing that all in. But yeah, at the time, and even if we had looked at it, it was a year ago. I don't think I remember.
Are there any online questions? Yes, there are a few. Oh, sure.
One of the questions is regarding the problem of lack of affordable and accessible housing. Is it possible to distinguish in the data among availability of affordable but not accessible, accessible but not affordable, and neither accessible nor affordable? And then have you looked at transportation issues within the survey?
I'm going to have to admit that right now we have not gotten any state-level data that could answer those kinds of questions. I know that at least one of the states that I've visited so far, they have an electronic database that flags housing people would consider accessible. And so, and there's a small group of states that have that kind of data, so that theoretically, as long as that data is maintained in a way, we could do some analysis of that, but that is not part of our
And just one more comment on that. I just actually my site visit to New York, and New York registry first reads out any units that are not designated as affordable according to the HUD standards. So within that, you're only going to be able to find housing that either the landlord or something has been determined that they will offer it at affordable rates. A third of somebody's income at this point was somehow tied to the SSI rate or something like that. And within that, then they have a huge number. I mean, you know how many variables they have in their database regarding different accessibility options. And so that's already one way of really looking at the different ways in which places are accessible.
Many of the housing registries were developed under the Real Choice Systems Change Grant Program that MESA still has grants that are working on different issues at this time. And many of those housing registries really did have a tremendous number of variables that were developed so that when someone goes in They can click, this is how much money I make, this is how much income, this is how much I spend, this is that, this is where I'd like to look. And I mean, the variables are just amazing. And the same thing, I was just down in Georgia, and they're starting to work with their local housing authorities for the vouchers and talking about the registry and how that works with helping individuals and helping the transition coordinators in trying to find housing. It's been really amazing. So there's a lot of states who have developed those housing registries with multiple variables.
Deb, next question. Are there Allison, others in the audience? Okay.
Bernadette Rice, Lewisburg. Could you say a little bit about how recruitment, retention, and training of the direct care workforce is affecting state MFP goals and how you're going to look at that in the evaluation?
There's sort of two ways to look at that. One is as a limitation on the numbers that can be transitioned in the community, particularly if someone's personal care needs are very, very high. Somebody needs 24/7 care in the community that are ranging for enough personal care aides and finding home care agencies, for example, that can staff at that level, or if somebody's able to find an independent worker. You see that issue come up as a problem that many states are having, particularly with the higher need folks. On the other hand, the opportunity that I think MFP presents for the direct care workforce is that, I don't think I have the number handy, but I would say probably about a third of the states intend to reinvest some of the net revenue that comes from the enhanced FMAP into various kinds of direct care worker initiatives, whether that be training programs, efforts to try and retain more of those direct care workers, other kinds of initiatives that states have put at the top of their agendas for rebalance.
Okay, we'll take two more quick questions. Are there questions, online questions? Any more?
We do have some online, but you want to take one from the audience?
Carl Pulzer of the National Center for Assisted Living. I came in late. I apologize, so you may have addressed this. Did you do any work on the capacity of the program to serve people with cognitive issues, Alzheimer's? And so much of the population in nursing homes are folks with conditions. And with assisted living, one of the issues, and I'm glad that was mentioned, that there's a barrier there in qualifying as a resident under the money called Crises program has to do with, in the statute, having to have lockable doors under the control of the resident in cooking facilities, where that's very difficult with the cognitively disabled. That's number one. And the other second question has to do with, do you have any capacity, or the grantees have any capacity to track people as they decline over time? Because we know from this population that they do decline over time. They go up a little bit and they go down a lot. They go up and down.
Carl, let me try to answer your question with regard to the first point. I'm not sure I can answer the second, but there are some states that in their operational protocols even said we don't expect to really be able to deal with folks who have severe cognitive impairment. Other states were not so obvious about that. But as you might imagine, the states that we think of as the pioneers, the ones that are really pushing the envelope on home and community-based services, I'm thinking here particularly of Oregon. As part of their MFP initiative, they are specifically targeting us, because that's basically who's left in a lot of the nursing homes in Oregon. And they are trying to use the strategy that they've used all these many years to provide alternatives to institutional care by specifically trying to start small group homes that would be specifically designed to care for people with cognitive impairment. So that's where we're looking at some of the innovations.
To address the issue of assisted living settings, we have looked at the statute and we've made some recommendations to be reviewed by the Office of General Counsel at CMS. And we've just issued, I think, July 31st, if I remember the date correctly, July 30th to 31st, additional guidance on a qualified residence. And I think that that's not going to address all of the different types of assisted living settings across the United States, but I think that that additional guidance will open some of those assisted living settings up to participants in the Money Follows the Person program. So while we couldn't change the statute, we looked at the statute, looked at the assisted living settings, and we're hoping to raise the bars, so to speak, of the assisted living units and allowing some of the restrictions that are in the Money Follows the Person statute, so that more individuals with cognitive impairments can be served through the Money Follows the Person program. That's one of the reasons I think when we see the data that the elderly population has not reached the same benchmarks that we had hoped in the early part of the demonstration. So we're hoping that while we're not going to satisfy all of the requests from the assisted living community and providers as to being able to serve participants in the program, I think we've stretched it as far as statute will allow us to go. And we have that opinion from our Office of General Counsel. We have it out, and we have it in the hands of all of the participating states.
Is it available to the general public?
Yes, it is available to the general.
Where?
I believe it's on our Money Follows the Person website, but we'll make sure that you get that. Very good. Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank those of you who came in person and those of you who attended via webinar. I'd like to remind you to pick up a flyer about our next forum, which will explore individuals with disabilities and the relationship between disability and the criminal justice system. That will take place December 3rd at 12 p.m. I believe our speakers will be available to hang around for a few minutes to answer any remaining questions. Thank you for coming.
Good. Very good.
Of the shuttle. Maybe, yeah, there's one at the
Well, you know,
shuttle? The time, yeah.